Good afternoon. Thank you for being here with us. Community TV of Santa Cruz sponsors Let's Talk with Lou, and another wonderful evening and a wonderful guest that we're going to have this evening. And I always enjoy talking to those public servants out there, our electeds, and this is one of those evenings where we get to do that. It's always a pleasure to have our electeds on because they are so knowledgeable and know so much about our community, and not just one district, but they know virtually what's happening throughout the county. And we have one of those evenings where we're going to have somebody that's engaging as usual. He's been on the show a couple times, 3 times I believe before, and he is just one of the originals that go way back, and none other than John Leopold. Welcome.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me on, Lou.
Thank you for being here. I know you're in the middle of some busy scheduling, and today is Sunday, so I appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here, John. I wanted to talk a little bit about, and we'll get into what he does and what the Board of Supervisors do as in general as a job. It's Civics 101, you might say, and we won't stall out there too long, but just to differentiate between what a county supervisor does as compared to, let's say, somebody that's at a city council, and we've had some folks that are from Sacramento and some folks from DC, and how we distinguish from those people and what happens here locally. I want to read a bit of John Leopold's bio, and it's exhaustive, so I won't read it all because he's done so much for the community. Actually, I was blown away. I was reading before I came into the studio, and just it goes on and on and on, and wonderful organizations that he's been with prior to being elected too. So I think he shows a real love for our community, and we need as much as we can get of that from all our electeds, and we certainly do have it with John, and virtually everybody that I've seen having been on the show has done very similar type things, but this thing just is exhaustive. It's great. Not exhausting, but exhaustive. John Leopold was elected to the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors in November of 2008. He represents the 1st District, which includes Live Oak, Soquel, the Summit area, Santa Cruz Gardens, and Cabanero. John previously served on the Cabrillo College Governing Board for 8 years. It's Cabrillo College. I believe Cabrillo is the jewel of our county. I love Cabrillo for sure, and I've served some committees there myself. He led the effort to pass a bond for the college in 2004, and we'll talk a little bit about that once we get to the bio, but if you've been up there, it feels to me like a university campus. Gorgeous, gorgeous campus, and hopefully I'm not misquoting, but as I remember, close to $200 million was in that.
Yeah, well, about 118 it was that one.
Okay, very big project, one of the biggest I understand in the county. As a member of the Board of Supervisors, John has been working with the community to develop an effective vacation rental ordinance. My hat's tipped off to you on that one for sure. He gave sensible gun shop regulations out on a set of budget policies that prioritize services to the community and medical cannabis regulations. John engaged hundreds of community members in developing community project as part of the redevelopment agency and criminal justice reform's efforts to response in the state's response prison alignment program. I do have to say, I'll inject here, being a small business owner and a property owner and a commercial property owner in Soquel, I'm amazed at how he just brought all of us together, and his constituents certainly voiced their opinions, and he heard us. And he continues to do that. It's excellent to see that kind of stuff, a true public servant. He's led the board in banning hydraulic fracking in Santa Cruz County and secured Sunny Cove Beach for permanent public use. And John played a leadership role in the acquisition of the branch rail line through the Santa Cruz County and the development of the master plan for the Monterey Bay Scenic Trail, sometimes known as the Rail Trail. He has worked collaboratively with schools in the creation of a youth center with the Live Oak School District and Santa Cruz Boys and Girls Club, and new recreational facilities with Loma Prieta and Happy Valley School District. Lives in Live Oak with his wife, Teresa, and 2 daughters, Rose and Anna. very ambitious young ladies too. We were comparing and talking about schools and colleges, and as the family does it, they do everything at 110%.
You should have them on one day.
I'm sure we will. And I will say this, for more information about John's background, visit his friends, www.friendsofjohnleopold.com. And I was looking at it again earlier, and it just tremendous amount of service. And I've known John for a lot of years, and it's mind-blowing to see all that service he's given to the community. Anyways, thank you so much for being here, John. We've got a lot of ground to cover. It is a re-election year. Certainly it's a prime time to see what your ideals are for the coming future, being re-elected, and the projects that you've started, and the things that are challenges to you. But let's start right with youth. I think that's something that we all have a vested interest in. And in some parts of the county, gangs are a big problem. What is the county going to do to support young people in the Mid-County? And could you talk a little bit about what you started?
Sure. Well, as the father of two girls, one who's a teenager, one who just turned 21, you really care about what life is like for young people here in Santa Cruz. And if we really want our community to be successful, the young people of our community have to be successful as well. Sure. So we have a multi-part plan about supporting young people. We started maybe 6 years ago some new athletic leagues in Live Oak, a futsal league involving about 350 young people through the Live Oak Elementary School District, and that's been going on every summer. 5 years ago we started a Junior Giants program, which is trying to create places where kids can be involved with pro-social positive activities. There's been a Boys and Girls Club presence in Live Oak for a number of years in a trailer at the Shoreline Middle School campus. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I heard from the community back in 2009 when we did those redevelopment planning meetings is people wanted facilities for young people. So I was able to secure funding before the closure of redevelopment to do a great collaborative project with the Live Oak School District, Boys and Girls Club, and the county to build a youth center, including a Boys and Girls Club, that is just going to open in a couple weeks. This is a really exciting development for our community because there aren't a lot of youth services in Live Oak, but if it was a city, it would be the third largest city in Santa Cruz County. So the first floor is a Boys and Girls Club with all the traditional things you think of as a Boys and Girls Club, and the second floor is more for teens. It's going to have a recording studio, a dance studio, a kitchen to teach kids how to eat well, some great technology, as well as a technology center for kids and their homework. And this is an exciting addition to the community so kids can still be involved with good activities after school, as well as the support they get at schools. So we're trying to think about all the times when kids have downtime for activities for them to be in that are positive, and ways for them to be involved and have mentors that they can work with. Many of our sheriff deputies serve as coaches of the futsal league. The deputy sheriffs are also involved with the Junior Giants program, so that forms relationships that are very positive long term. And then we're also working with all the nonprofits that exist in Live Oak, whether it be the Live Oak Family Resource Center, or the Boys and Girls Club, our new medical center, the East Cliff Family Health Center, the school district, to figure out how we work together to not only improve the lives of those kids, but their entire family. So we're working on a major collective impact project. We are trying to keep an eye out about youth violence and the things that contribute to youth violence. About 2 years ago, the Criminal Justice Council, which I sit on, led an effort to create a youth violence prevention plan that really took in the voices of hundreds of people in the community to sort of figure out what kids need to be successful and avoid violence. And the report was issued, but in an interest not to have it just sit on the shelf. I co-chair a group for a Santa Cruz Live Oak portion of enacting the plan. And we have about 40 or 50 community leaders, young people, teachers, who are involved in developing a plan and enacting it so kids have the best opportunities they can have. in Live Oak, Soquel, and the rest of the county.
You know, that's tremendous. It's a great amount of stuff that you're doing, and your staff. And again, my hat tips off to you, because just that in and of itself, if that were the end of our talk, that's got to have, it's got your plate full to do all those things. Obviously, you've got a heart. Your energy level just must be tremendous, because that's a lot. That's a lot. Having worked on with the schools and been on a school board, I understand some of the issues that are challenging all of our youth, and you're right there implementing, putting into play, and acting on the numbers that we have out there. You know, probably from some of the entities in the county that give you those the social science entities, I would say, that give you that information in terms of where the needs are. So it's just not hot at all. It's very calculating in terms of what you're trying to get accomplished. That's amazing. I love the fact that it's working you hard. I'm always in awe when our public electeds, you know, look a little tired most of the time. And I think okay, they're doing their job. If we get somebody that looks too rested, it's like, all right, well, they got to get to snuff. They're still new, and you do look refreshed, but I think you're certainly you're in your stride. Let's talk a little bit about the criminal justice system. The last 5 years, we've had monument changes in the criminal justice system. And how is that affecting Santa Cruz County? Because I think we'll talk about this maybe in more detail a little bit later, but the realignment. But mostly, how do those criminal justice changes affect the, you know, how do they tie in with the youth?
Sure.
And then we can talk about the non-youth as well.
Yeah, well, the county was really a leader in the country in trying to look differently at how you hold young people accountable for their actions. And starting in the late 90s, early 2000s, we looked at our juvenile hall. And although I wasn't in office at the time, the county supervisors really saw that we had a facility that was filled and actually needed more space. And there was talk about how do we find more money to build another juvenile hall. It has about 42 spaces in it. Mm-hmm. Under the leadership of Supervisor Marty Wormhout, we decided to do something that at that point was an outlier strategy, and said, why don't we try to hold youth accountable in different ways rather than simply incarceration, and help turn them around, mm-hmm. rather than having them keep on returning time and time again to juvenile hall.
Let me ask you this, how were you involved in that? Because this was before you became elected.
Well, I mean, I was aware of it, and as someone who's worked in the community, I followed it, mm-hmm.
but
I can't claim credit for it. Mm-hmm. What they did then has affected how we deal with adults later on, but we said, look, maybe young people should get a chance to do better. Maybe they need help. So we started an evening center program down in Watsonville, so kids after school could get educational support and nutritional support. Mm-hmm. We worked to do neighborhood accountability boards, where if young people created problems in a neighborhood, the neighbors got to decide what would happen with them, excluding incarceration. Mm. We started doing a lot more education at the facility, mm-hmm. and we changed the diet of the kids who were there. You know, they were being fed a lot of carbs to sort of slow them down, and instead it was really focused on healthy and nutritional food. Mm-hmm. Well, what happened? Over a 10-year period, the number of young people at the juvenile hall, mm-hmm. Decreased. Tonight there's probably only about 20 kids in that facility. So we didn't have to build a new facility. What else happened? The teen crime rate actually went down in Santa Cruz County, and the recidivism rate also went down. So if you can stop someone from committing crime after crime, mm-hmm. that gives them a chance to get their life together. And young people are going to make mistakes. That's the nature of life. Mm-hmm. And we have to create a system where if they make a mistake, they can be held accountable, but then put them on the right path. When we started that back in 16 years ago, it was an outlier strategy. There weren't a lot of places that were doing it. But the Annie Casey Foundation recognized the value of what we were doing, mm-hmm. Around alternatives to juvenile detention. They've started a big program that is nationwide, that involves 40 states and 600 jurisdictions. And Santa Cruz now is a model site, and people come and visit from all over the country to see what we're doing here in Santa Cruz, because it's the future of what communities should be doing all over the country. And at the last conference I went to, there were, as I said, there were over 600 jurisdictions represented. So sometimes you're going to, when you're on the bleeding edge, that can be a little uncomfortable. But I give credit to my predecessors for having the foresight to use a data-driven effort that has not only decreased cost to the county, decreased incarceration of young people, and has meant that we actually seen a teen crime rate that has gone down in Santa Cruz County. So that's the trifecta of public policy when you can get all those pieces together.
Well, you know, I'm very happy to hear that, you know, you're giving some credit to your predecessors. But on the other hand, though, you were following those issues to be able to kind of, you know, bring them to fruition and to, you know, come to where you're at now. And my guess would be, you know, not much of a limb here, but you've got your hand on some other kinds of projects like that that,
sure,
you know, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road, which, you know, kind of comes into play, and we can talk about that, you know, re-election time, to be able to continue those projects.
Sure.
I love to hear that, and it's just not, you know, something that you say you know you're going to do. You've done it. You've got this history of having done something when you had no vested interest per se, because your kids have probably never been in trouble like mine. Have never been in any trouble, and you just had a heart for youth, and it just shows. That's neat. It shows where you're coming from and the heart that you have. And those are the kind of public, again, servants that it's amazing that we have folks like yourself. And I know you probably don't want to pat yourself on the back for that, but I can.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. You know, I think that most people's view of the criminal justice system is shaped by TV and fear and just lack of real knowledge of what goes on. And as once I became supervisor, I became a lot better versed in what these issues were. And after attending a conference put on by the Annie Casey Foundation of the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, I really saw that we needed to help the community be better informed about this. So I worked with other elected officials, community-based organizations, our probation department, a judge, some defense lawyers, to create a group called Smart on Crime. And we started meeting regularly to talk about what those issues are, because I perceived that there was a real interest in wanting to do things differently here in Santa Cruz. About a year after we started Smart on Crime, the governor announced prison realignment. And all of a sudden that became very clear about what it is we should do. We needed to play a role in educating the community about what was going on in the criminal justice system and how things could be better and we could all be safer. So in May of 2011, the same day that the U.S. Supreme Court delivered the Plauta v. Brown decision, which required California to reduce the prison population, there were 275 people at the Live Oak Elementary gymnasium to hear from the sheriff, a UCSC professor, Craig Haney, and the probation director to help them understand that we were going to be able to deal with these changes, that we had success in dealing with juveniles and trying alternatives to incarceration that have worked out very well, and that we could do the same thing with adults. And Professor Haney did a great presentation about how bad the state prison system was, and how it wasn't making people better, it was making them considerably worse. And so we did a number of those over the county that included hundreds of people. And when this prison realignment was adopted in October of 2011, our community was very well prepared to put together an innovative system that has proven to work pretty well, even as it changes the dynamics of who's in our county jail, what responsibilities we have with seeing folks who used to be in state prison who are released to the community, and how we can hold people accountable in some ways other than simply just putting them in a jail cell, so we can lower the recidivism. You know, for someone to recidivate here in Santa Cruz County, that costs us $40,000. Wow. With additional cost. So if we can break that, it's not only good for the individual, and it's good for public safety, it's also good for the pocketbook. I love the fact that you know, you mentioned some names. Craig Haney, a former professor of mine, he is considered to be a national expert at what he does. No doubt about it. And certainly you hugely involved at UCSC as a former employee. And I like the fact that we're taking advantage of the fact that we've got one of the best institutions, I believe, in the state of California
in social psychology. And anyways, and Craig is phenomenal. I don't know if you've read any of his books, but he writes. I've never read anything quite like it. But our folks in D.C. listen to him.
No, I mean he was testifying in D.C. during these meetings that we were holding, and at that time we had just appointed a new sheriff, Phil Wowak, and both he and another professor, Craig Reinerman, and we sat down with the new sheriff to talk about issues, and it was a great meeting of the minds, from the practitioner to the academic to the policymaker, to really find out what will work for Santa Cruz. And I give a lot of credit to Sheriff Wowak and the help we got from UCSC, that we created a system here that that has worked pretty well. As I say, that has lowered the recidivism rate, has kept us from dangerous levels of population in our county jail, and has reserved the space for the most serious offenders rather than low-level offenders who will actually be harmed more by being in jail than being out of jail.
You mentioned, that certainly there were some mandates that we minimize those folks that are in the prison system, and certainly that goes over to our youth as well. And you also mentioned earlier that there's some models that have started in Santa Cruz that are considered to be national models, and I believe we've got 3 of them in place, and they're looking at those. And one of them is in part was started by Craig Haney in terms of working with the probation departments and be able to get people not necessarily imprisoned, because that doesn't seem to work as well as people might think, but to be rehabbed in different kinds of ways. And it would cost us less money too, but it would be in the long haul much more effective to get those folks out to be productive individuals that are earning incomes and they have vocations and those kinds of things, because it is tough on those people. Somebody had mentioned to me that there was a move to minimize, I think it was criminal records that were following people.
Sure.
A friend of mine from City Council. And do you know much about that?
Well, I mean, voters passed an initiative in November 2014 called Prop 47, which changed the kinds of crimes that would be felonies and changed them to misdemeanors. A lot of petty crime and drug crimes were reduced from felonies to misdemeanors. And it was retroactive, so you could go back if you had previously been convicted of one of some of these charges. You could get your record cleared to be a misdemeanor rather than a felony. What we know is that when people apply for a job, there's often a question on there that says, have you been ever convicted of a felony? If someone checks that box, yes, whether it's right or wrong, they're not often asked to be hired. And that doesn't really give a chance for someone to state their case as to what the circumstances were. So now being able to reduce that felony to a misdemeanor allows them to get a better job. Research done by San Jose State and Stanford University has shown that someone who can clear their record has a better chance of getting a job and can increase their annual earnings by over $6,000. In addition, their cost to the community for social services goes down by about $11,000. So there's a lot of win there for everybody involved, especially for many of the crimes listed there that were victimless crimes. They were drug possession charges that were felonies that had been reduced to misdemeanor. So the county of Santa Cruz and a lot of other places in California are now working to try to find these folks who have these charges on their record to help them clear. Here in Santa Cruz, it's estimated there's about 11,000 people who could take advantage of this. So the county recently worked with a United Way and a whole host of community organizations to do a fair out in Aptos that attracted hundreds of people. I mean, it was packed. And there's the Watsonville Law Clinic is doing a series of workshops to help people clear their record, and the county provided funding to the public defender's office to have someone just work on that because the benefits are clear, and then we think in the end it actually makes our community safer.
Excellent, excellent. Good information. Certainly some hot topics, and we've had actually a few other electeds in the last few weeks on, and supervisors, and they had mentioned that transportation is big right now.
Sure.
Certainly you have got a direct impact on transportation in our community, and the State Assembly failed to address the future of transportation funding in their special session last August. What are we doing to address our transportation infrastructure needs? And could we talk about, and I think that's what that is referencing, I might be wrong, but unfunded mandates. Is that where that applies?
Well, what happened is in the last 15 years, the state has gone through budget crisis after budget crisis. They've shifted money that even voters approved to go to things in order to help fill the state budget hole. So, for instance, fees for truck weights used to go directly towards repair of our road. They're our heaviest vehicles. They create the most damage to our roads. So those fees were used to help pay for the roads. In 2010, the state legislature decided that that needed to go to paying something else, paying down some debt. There were other initiatives that were passed by the voters that they also redirected back to the general fund of the state. So that means there's less money for road repair, there's less money for the bus system. They also did a complicated maneuver that you only find in state legislatures called this gas tax swap, which we used to get money from the gas tax, and we used to get a little bit more as the price went up. And this gas tax swap, they capped how much counties would get, and they said, don't worry, gas prices never go down. You won't be hurt by this. Well, you know, January a year ago, gas prices were down to $2.50, and the gas tax dropped 6 cents. And this year, it's going to go down again. We're estimating here in Santa Cruz, just the county, the unincorporated area, that we're going to lose $1.5 million from the loss of that gas tax revenue. Wow. About 40% of the state funds to fund state transportation projects are going to be cut. So there's projects in Santa Cruz County that have received funding from the California Transportation Commission that are now getting their money taken away.
Oh, so they had it and they're getting it taken away?
Yeah, they had it and they're going to be taken away. So there's real effect.
Isn't that even kind of worse thing than unfunded
Well, I mean, it
mandate,
means we've started the work. We might have even taken on some expenses, and now we're not going to get the resources. So the state legislature called together a special session. The governor called together a special session last August, and there were some really good proposals floated around. You know, that electric cars should have to pay a special fee. That we should index the gas tax so we don't have that problem in the future. That we should readjust where those weight fees go. So we were very hopeful. Some of the programs had between $4 and $6 billion that would come into local roads. They managed to do nothing in that month. Literally, they did not pass any transportation funding bills. So they still have an open session, but the closer we get to the election, the less likely it is that someone's going to want to vote for anything that is perceived as new taxes. So that places the local community at a real disadvantage because we're the last stop when it comes to funding. And without those resources, we have hundreds of miles of roads that we have to take care of without the resources to do it. So we've been looking locally about ways in which we could fund a transportation system that meets everyone's needs. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about it, but over the last 5 years, I've worked very hard on the Regional Transportation Commission, our County Regional Transportation Commission, to really develop a transportation plan that looks at all modes of transportation rather than just one. We approved a plan in 2014 that looked at all modes of transportation. And now we are considering putting a ballot measure on to help fund it.
Wow. So we've got some huge issues in front of us in terms of you know, transportation in our community. I know certainly, you know, our highways are pretty jammed, and you know, I come from far away to get to my office about 15 minutes. I think it's far away, and it takes me sometimes 30 minutes, and it's like, oh, depending on, you know, the time of the day. And it seems like it's, you know, it's not letting up certain times of the week and certainly certain times of the day, I think, but we're all challenged by that. And it sounds like that there's some things in the works. At least it's being considered that you know, we've got a big problem and we need to do something about it. The big challenge is certainly the money. You know, that kind of brings up an interesting point. We're kind of in the recovery, a modest recovery, I understand, from the recession. And would you say that we're always a year or two in the rears from getting money to the state, or is it pretty quick? Let's say if we've got a robust economy, do we not feel that effects locally, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, we've seen more activity at the county. You know, building permits are up, people coming into the planning department. We see it out in the community with people building things in a way that they haven't done during the 5 years of the Great Recession. So we see some of those benefits. We see more people employed. Our unemployment rate has gone down quite a bit over the last couple of years. The foreclosure crisis that struck Santa Cruz has greatly receded. So those are all positive signs. The state budget is based on a couple of very volatile factors. So when the economy gets good, they do have more money. Governor Brown has been very resistant to spend more money. He wants to pay as much of the debt off as possible, and there's a great value in that. And we also have to make sure that we take care of the basic infrastructure we have here.
Sure.
The Congress took 10 years to come up with a transportation measure. When they passed it last year, it basically had no new funding. So we're at the same funding levels we were over 10 years ago. And the costs haven't gone down, they've only gone up. And so we have to stretch those dollars much thinner than we did before, which makes it hard to keep up with all the needs that are out there.
Certainly, you know, we're growing, and certainly our housing needs are there, and so we've got some growth ahead of us as well, and so that all ties into transportation. You know, in terms of relieving congestion, you know, in the county, can you talk a little bit more about that? What kind of specific ideas do you have, and have they been implemented? Are they beginning to be thought through, and how far along are they? I know there's some things on the workbench, so to speak.
Yeah, so there's a number of different things that we're trying to do. One is we're trying to take advantage of those people who aren't using their car. So we've made some infrastructure improvements. Just a couple of years ago, we opened the Arana Gulch Path, which connects the city of Santa Cruz and Live Oak, which was a plan that was a decade in the making.
Where's that at exactly?
Well, it's right at the end of Bromer Street, right as you head down to the yacht harbor. There's a pathway that now connects you over to Broadway. In the city of Santa Cruz. It's a beautiful path. They've done some incredible restoration work, and I recommend you get there because there's a way it links these two communities together in a safe way. You don't have to go on SoCal Avenue, which can be a very dangerous place to ride a bike. We've also tried to make it easier for people to ride their bike or walk. So in SoCal Village, we put in the very first green bike lanes anywhere in the county. And we're looking to expand that to help people see that there are bicyclists in these very busy intersections. And we've also tried to complete our pedestrian network. So for instance, from SoCal High down to the village, there was no sidewalk, which meant that hundreds of kids were coming down every day in a very dangerous situation. So we completed that sidewalk. These are little things that make a big difference in the life of the community. We've also been trying to think differently about our bus system, and we're right now going through a big process to figure out if there's a way to make our bus system more efficient. And there'll be some community meetings coming up later on this year. We purchased the rail line, as you mentioned, about 3 years ago, and we made great strides there, both in terms of building a plan for the trail that would run alongside the tracks, and we've already funded 25% of the length. We have also done a rail study to try to look at the feasibility of passenger rail. It says that it's possible, but a lot more work needs to be done. But it said it could take 1,000 to 5,000 cars off of Highway 1 with a train that could get you from Santa Cruz to Watsonville in 30 minutes for $2.50. So there's some real excitement around that.
Nice.
And then with the ballot measure, we're looking to fund all those different pieces, our local road infrastructure, the bus system, especially for seniors and paratransit needs, for the disabled, for the trail next to the rail line, the rail trail, the rail line to do the studies necessary and improve the infrastructure like the Capitola Trestle, and then the highway that adds some auxiliary lanes from where it is now. It stops at Soquel and take it all the way down to State Park Drive.
You mentioned community meetings, great information, by the way, but you mentioned community meetings. That has always rung my bell, so to speak, because I've participated in at least being there.
Yeah.
And I've always, again, I say it all the time when I get an opportunity, I think as a business community, where I'm at in Soquel Village, we always feel so hurt. And I'm talking to other business members, and I think that you initiated a lot of that stuff, and you followed it through, and your people take the stats and they prioritize what your stakeholders are saying, and then you work on those initiatives. Let's talk a little bit about that, and you know, why has that been so successful? And would you feel like that you're going to continue those kinds of things with all these projects in the works?
Well, I think it's a vital part of local government is you have to be in communication with the community. And it doesn't mean that we get you in a room and we talk to you for 2 hours. It means that we provide information, give you a little bit of enough information to engage in an informed discussion, and then actually listen to you.
Sure.
I mean, one of the things that we found after those series of community meetings in 2009, where we attracted about 500 people, people saw their ideas get reflected in the plans. Mm-hmm. And what happened? It meant that future meetings, or whether it be about speed bumps or a new park, more and more people started showing up because they felt like though they had been heard. And when you feel listened to, you want to do it again. Sure. You like it when government listens to you. Sure. So that's what I try to do. I try to make sure that when we go out, that it's not just a one-way conversation, that it's really a two-way conversation.
Sure. So you're gathering the stats that you get at those meetings and then reflecting those stats in the kinds of things that you enact.
Right. Well, so in Soquel Village, for instance, there had been a long discussed plan for the Heart of Soquel Park, which was the former mobile home park that was behind the post office.
Beautiful project, by the way.
Yeah, well, we got that one completed too. It's a great project. Now we're working with the Capitola Soquel Chamber of Commerce. We're going to be working with merchants to figure out what kind of activities that we can do there to bring more people to Soquel Village, to take advantage of the storefronts and the businesses that are there. But one of the benefits of that, it also has a pathway that people will be able to walk along the creek bed or along the creek side and connect with the different parts of Soquel, whether it be Main Street, where Beer 30 and Michael's on Main is, or the village proper, where, you know, Tortilla Flats and Ming's Chinese are, and the bagelry. So that to me is there's lots of different benefits there. Getting people out of their car, that's a benefit to us all. Getting people to come to Soquel, that's a benefit to the Soquel village, and increasing the economic activity that's going on. Sure. And that's closer to where people live.
Well, and not only that, certainly that's where I'm at in my office, but people come from over to Silicon Valley off Old San Jose Highway, and one of the first things they see is the Soquel Village. And I understand from somebody that was a county department head, he's now retired, he said that that was, I think, a 15 or 20-year goal of his, is to have people come in and kind of come into like a little Los Gatos, something really quaint, cute, and I think that's part of that, the Heart of Soquel. And boy, I commend you for that. And also, I remember some of the challenges you had with that too, because if I remember correctly, that it was part of redevelopment dollars, and so you had to start that project before they went away, and you guys were scrambling. Your staff was just hustling.
Well, yeah, I mean, the county did something very different than a lot of other communities in California when the legislature decided to get rid of redevelopment. When we saw it coming, we decided to not take a chance that it wouldn't go through. And instead, we worked to take that list of projects that those 500 people would come up with and put as many of those projects under contract with a contractor or a third party as we could in order to preserve those funds. We had about $75 million for projects. And we got some great projects out of it. We got the new Center for Public Safety, which is we coordinated all the activities of the sheriff. We did the East Cliff Parkway. We're building this Boys and Girls Club. We did the park, and a number of other projects. Right now, that looks like a pretty good strategy because we got to keep all that $75 million here in this community.
All of it?
We were the only community in Santa Cruz, the only jurisdiction in Santa Cruz that didn't have to return money to the state, and we didn't have money left over in a bank account that that was given back to the state instead of staying here for use in our local community. So I was real glad with that process, but it did require us to move a lot more quickly than we usually do.
Yeah, I remember that.
Government doesn't always work best when it works fast, but I think we did a pretty good job with that, and now we're starting to see the benefits of those projects.
Well, we would have lost some of those projects, or maybe even all of them, if you guys hadn't moved in the fashion that you did, because it was ready to go away. Could you talk a teeny bit about, just for our listening audience, what redevelopment did? And of course, they're gone now, but the monies that were there, and how do those, I don't want to spend too much time on there, but how did those monies get there, and then where did they go? And certainly we got to keep a lot of those.
Sure.
But why were they going to go away in the first place? Just a real quick few.
Yeah, well, so redevelopment was funded by something called tax increment financing, which basically means, in the case of the county, the redevelopment agency for Live Oak and Soquel was formed in 1987. Any increase in property tax that came in after 1987 for those properties in Live Oak and Soquel stayed here in this community and could be spent on removing what they called blight in Live Oak and Soquel. And as you know, in 1987, Live Oak and Soquel had made a very quick transition from being rural communities to being urban communities. And it didn't have basic infrastructure, didn't have good drainage, didn't have sidewalks, didn't have public facilities. And in the 25 years of the redevelopment agency, those are the kind of investments we made. And if you're like me and live on a street in Live Oak that can remember when we got our sidewalk, you realize what a difference that made in the neighborhood. All of a sudden, people were connecting in a whole different way. We built the Simpkins Swim Center, the animal shelter, the library, the Live Oak Resource Center. These were all great projects. Part of that additional property tax that was used to fund redevelopment was money that would have gone to the schools. So the state said, all right, your redevelopment agency, you get to keep that money, and the state will backfill the schools so the schools wouldn't lose any money.
So you got everything out of the deal pretty much.
Well, yeah, we could have taken money that went to both the library and the fire department. Yeah. The state wasn't going to backfill those, and we made a decision at the county that we didn't want to hurt our partners.
So the schools got what they had coming in the first place, and then you left everything else alone, and we still got money from the redevelopment to do the projects.
Yeah, so it generated about between $5 and $10 million a year, and we made these great investments that made a lot of sense. And in fact, if you look at property values in Live Oak and Soquel, they went up quickest in those 25 years than any other place in the county. They aren't the most expensive places, but you could just see that the value of them increased. So the state, in one of their budget crises, could not afford to continue to backfill schools. So the governor decided that he would get out of the redevelopment business, and so he would have more money for schools because he would get the property tax. For a redevelopment agency like the county, which did really all public projects, that really hurt us. Other jurisdictions in cities, most of their redevelopment area were commercial areas, and a lot of it was done around different economic developments. In the county, 87% of our redevelopment area was residential. And so it really made a difference in the lives of people who live in Live Oak and Soquel.
Wonderful foresight on your part and your staff's part. That's tremendous. I mean, to follow the issues, it's difficult, and to be able to implement, and then not only that, to have to be able to see that coming and then do something about it and get all those things that were accomplished. That's amazing.
It takes a lot of work, but if you have enough contacts and enough vision about ways in which to do it, you could really do incredible work here.
Yeah. Well, you're paying attention to all these things. That's great. Let's talk a little bit more. We've kind of talked a little bit about it, but the housing. The cost of housing continues to rise in our community for sure. And what can the county do to help ensure that all kinds of people get a chance to live here? The county recently approved a new housing element. And how is that going to help our housing needs? I guess this is a multi-level question. Sure. But certainly it's all kind of in the same realm of housing. Let's talk about that huge issue. I know you've got a heart for that, and I mentioned in the past that I'm fortunate that I got in when I did. I came to college in the 70s and never left, and I don't know if I could afford now necessarily to buy, and certainly I'm concerned, that my children I've got 3 kids, and 2 of them rent, and one of them's a medical practitioner, and she's married to a Lockheed engineer.
Sure.
And one of my children, but he's kind of an unusual situation. He can afford, and quite frankly, when he was getting ready to, when he got out of college, he says, "Dad," he says, "I'd love to be around, you guys and be back in the whole neighborhood in Santa Cruz." He goes, "But for what I can get in Austin, Texas,
yeah, sure.
As opposed to Santa Cruz," he goes, "I can get a 3,500 square foot place that's on 3 or 5 acres, but I'm going to be living in a condo." Well, he hit it right. He hit it when the housing market was down and his business is booming. And so anyways, it worked out okay. But
sure.
My other 2 kids and my grandkids, I'm concerned about those kinds of issues. Let's talk about that and our future.
Sure. Well, it actually ties in with the last subject of redevelopment, because redevelopment agencies were the largest funder of affordable housing in the state of California. Here in Santa Cruz County, it generated, just our redevelopment agency alone, generated about $8 million a year for affordable housing. Mm-hmm. And it built several thousand units of housing during its 25-year existence. They've taken away that funding source. So we're trying to think, as the economy has recovered, we've seen, of course, housing prices skyrocket once again, and we live in the most unaffordable place for communities of 500,000 or less. We are the most expensive place in the entire country to live.
So, and the ratio to income, was that it?
Yeah, well, I mean, just the cost of housing.
Yeah.
The cost of housing is the most expensive.
Okay.
And so that creates great pressure on your family, on my family, on all families. On top of that, we also suffered greatly during the Great Recession and a foreclosure crisis. Mm-hmm. During the height of that Great Recession, about 150 homes were being foreclosed on every month. And that month in, month out, for nearly 5 years. So there were over 5,000 homes that went into foreclosure in just that 5-year period. It was extraordinary.
I didn't realize that. That's a tremendous stat.
And there were epicenters of that. There were in Watsonville and Live Oak and on the Highway 9 corridor. It happened all over the county, but those 3 areas were hit the hardest. So we've been trying to think about a couple different ways in which we can meet the housing needs. One is we're trying to think about development differently. When voters in Santa Cruz County passed Measure J back in 1978, and that created an urban services boundary which said we're going to concentrate development in the urban services area, and we're going to keep the rural nature of our county. And so we're not going to extend services such as water or sewer out to the rural areas, but we're going to concentrate development in urban areas, Live Oak, Soquel, Aptos. When that was passed in 1978, there were about 13,000 available single-family lots left. Mm-hmm. Now it's less than 2,500. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to run out of single-family lots tomorrow, but we're getting towards the end of that development pattern, which is a suburban development pattern of single-family homes on 6,000 square foot lots. So over the last 2 years, we've held a number of community meetings around what we call the Sustainable Santa Cruz County Plan, which looks at a different kind of development pattern, which is increasing densities on our transit corridors. So what does that mean? Mm-hmm. It means that on Soquel Drive, you might see 2- or 3-story buildings that are mixed-use buildings that might have retail or offices on the first floor, and on the second or third story might have housing. Along our major transit corridors, that means they can access bus. There's other services that they can get so they can walk, may not need a car. So that helps with our congestion issue as well. The other thing, which I've come around to understanding, is that there's a concept of affordability by design, which is a 3,500 square foot home is probably not going to be affordable to most people. But a 600 or 800 or 1,000 square foot unit may be more affordable for people, and it's a way to get them into the housing market. But we don't really have a lot of those places here in Santa Cruz. So if we look at the greater density along our transportation corridors, where people could have either townhomes or apartments, that there may be a better chance for someone to get into those units that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford housing here in Santa Cruz. The other thing we've done is we try to create a fund for creating affordable housing, and we've done what a lot of other communities in California have done, which is we've attached fees to the new construction of homes and businesses, which is the first time we're asking businesses to pay a part of the affordable housing needs in our community, because the new building construction leads to new housing needs. Our county did it a little bit differently, which is we said we want to give some priority to people building smaller homes. So your fees are going to be less for a smaller home per square foot than, if you will, for a larger home. So if you build a 2,000 square foot home, you're going to be paying between $5 and $7 a square foot as our affordable housing fee. But if you're building a home over 4,000 square feet, you're going to be paying $15 a square foot. Because what we're saying is, if you have the resources to build a big home, you have a bigger responsibility to help with the affordable housing needs of our community. We think that gradiated scale works best to make sure that the family who's bought just a lot and wants to build their dream home, a modest dream home, that they shouldn't be hit very hard. But the guy who wants to build the monster home, he's going to pay a little bit more.
That's reasonable. That sounds like it's equitable, and I think that those folks that are in that income bracket that can build the monster homes, I think they recognize that you know, we've got some obligations to those that can't. It has nothing to do with whether you made it or you didn't. I mean, people are they have their lot in life, and some jobs pay better than others, and some people inherit, and there's all kinds of other extended issues. I mean, so I think that's a reasonable thing to do. It sounds like something that's been well thought through, and it sounds like it's in place anyways right now.
Well, I mean, so we had to do a very detailed legal study, a nexus study, and we had a number of meetings where we talked about what these fees should be, and our board was interested in this scale moving up as the houses got larger, and it took a little while for us to find the right numbers because no one else had done it in California. So we were sort of breaking new ground.
Sure.
In addition, the housing element that we just approved is sort of a policy document to where we want to go. We want to make it easier for people to build accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, or tiny homes.
Are those granny units, or that
granny
different?
Units, another name for them.
Okay.
And what are the barriers, and how do we support that activity? The board had already taken action on creating a vacation rental ordinance, which we're increasingly seeing that people using Airbnb and other platforms like that have taken housing stock out of circulation, and so we put some restrictions on that.
Okay.
We've tried to look at some of our existing regulations to make them more flexible. So the mixed-use project that I mentioned earlier on those transit corridors, we have very rigid requirements that it has to be 50% retail, 50% housing. And you might have a good project that's 60% retail, 40% housing, or 60% housing, 40% retail. But we don't have there isn't a mechanism where you could do that, so we have to change our policies around that. The other important element of the housing element was it identified 160 units in Santa Cruz County that are currently affordable, but whose affordability restrictions are expiring in the next 2 years. Which means they were built just a little under 30 years ago with funding from the Housing and Urban Development, and they were required to be affordable for 30 years. But now, as they get to the end of the 30-year period, we don't know what's going to happen. So now we're going to be engaged in a big effort. There are 3 properties totaling over 160 units that we want to maintain as affordable housing, because the cost of having to build 160 new units of housing is extraordinary. So protect our existing stock, think creatively about the kind of development we do in the future, charge fees based on the size of their home for new construction, and try to be creative about things like accessory dwelling units, granny units, or tiny homes, to see if we can create a diversity of housing stock.
Excellent. Actually, believe it or not, we are coming close to the end of our hour. It goes quickly.
Sure.
You always have such a rich abundance of information, and I follow a lot of your stuff in the newspaper, and you're doing a great job with what you're doing. And if we could talk, we got about another 4 minutes. If we can sum up, because you're going to be, people are going to be at the polls. They're going to be seeing your name because you're going for re-election, and hopefully you will be successful. I'm sure you will be. But what would you like your stakeholders to think about, John, when they're at the polls? And maybe a couple of things you can talk about, something that our listeners would remember you by. by when they go to the polls?
Well, I think that local government is the most responsive arm of the public sector. So I like to think that in my years as county supervisor, that I've worked very hard to be connected with my constituents of the 1st District and all the people of Santa Cruz County. I go out a lot. I meet regularly with the community. I go to community functions to be engaged with the community. And some of the best ideas have come from the bottom up, not the top down. And so I want to continue doing that. As you can see with the projects we've talked about here today, that they don't just happen, you don't think about it one day and they happen the next day. They take a couple of years to make them real. So what I hope to do in my next term is I want to complete a major portion of the rail trail. I want to build some more parks in the district. I want to complete this facility, the Boys and Girls Club, and look at other youth-serving facilities. I care deeply about the economic future for everybody in Santa Cruz County, and I led the effort to create our Economic Development Office in the county, and I hope to expand that and really build our town centers, whether they be Pleasure Point, SoCal Village, or the Summit in my district, to really strengthen them so people have great opportunities. I want to make sure that kids and all families get the health care that they need, and I've been working to expand health care for families across the district. So those are just a few of the things that I intend to work on, as well as making sure that we can deal with the state mandates which come down whether we like it or not. Excellent.
John, as usual, you've been a great guest, and it's always so engaging to listen to everything that you're doing, and I'm hopeful that you will be successful in your re-election. I know you work harder than anybody that on the face of the earth, and so thank you for that. And I'm sure you'll be on again in the near future.
Happy to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you to our listening audience. Community TV is predominantly made up of volunteers. If you are interested, if you have an inclination to be a volunteer, we have directors, we have camera people, we have lighting people, and we have producers and hosts, and our equipment down here is amazing. And if you've got some kind of background, or even if not, you can go through one of our training programs and you can become a volunteer. And to get involved in such an organization as Community TV. I've been involved for some years now, and it's been just nothing but blessing in my life to see how everybody works so hard. We've had volunteers tonight. We had Keith Gudger, and he is our director and our chair of our board of directors, and Jim Davis on audio. Thank you, Jim. Camera, we had Gail Williamson, and another camera, we had Annie Newman. In management crew, we had Steve Pletch. So those are some of the volunteers that come out on a Sunday in the middle of the afternoon, on Valentine's Day too, and give their time and their energy, but most of all they give their heart, and I think that that's something to be commended. Volunteerism is wonderful in our community. We have a great engagement with so many folks that give their time, and the quality that we have here is, again, it's second to none. It's not a mistake. It just doesn't come together accidentally. It comes together with a lot of hard work. And I think that you can see some of the things and improvements that we've done for Community TV and the community at large. And if you've got some ideas, please let us know. Thank you. Call us, write us, and let us know. Thank you so much for being here.